Hello, happy Wednesday evening, soon to be Thursday. It's about 11:42 p.m. at the time of this recording. But if you're not listening to this on a Wednesday or a Thursday, I hope you are having a very good any day of the week. I want to make a quick recording to talk about depression as an adaptation. I felt one could describe, okay, I felt very sad, alone, and hopeless, and deeply, deeply sad. Not just sad to the end that I could be consoled, but I had this deep sense of loneliness, just this deep sense of emptiness that followed me, that follows me. I still feel this way sometimes. I still feel this way quite a lot. It's not a constant, nor is it something that can be nailed down to a pattern. I feel this way. I felt a deep sense of loneliness in my childhood. I felt a lot of deep shame about myself. I believed, one of the beliefs that I held was that I'd never fall in love. I'd never find someone who loved me for me. I felt like that was strongly lacking in my connection with my mother. I never felt like she knew who I was or was ever really interested. She was always kind of preoccupied within her own life. I was always kind of just like a piece that you display on the mantle, like a topic of conversation, but more as a point of reference. She wouldn't really talk to me. She wasn't really interested. More so like if she was having a conversation with me, even today, it's more like she's trying to garner some kind of I don't know, like she's playing a character. And I'm basically having an empty conversation with an empty shell of a human being. Without context, without knowing my mother, that may sound like a very cold thing to say, but I've become aware that the person that I believed my mother is very different from the person that she is based on her actions. If you listen to the way that she talks about herself, she does exhibit degrees of vulnerability and kind of like not helplessness, but kind of like well, like she's willing to admit to kind of like some of the struggles that she'll deal with, and in fact, she does get emotional at times. But she seems to lack when it comes to me, when I'm really, really hurting, any sort of palpable empathy or warmth. I constantly feel like when I come to her for like really difficult times in my life, really difficult emotions, she's just like very detached, very cold. And it gives me this very deep sense of like, am I being manipulative? Like, do I not know how I feel? That's the belief that develops, where it's like, okay, well, if the person that whom I should be absolutely the most closestly connected with, my mother, I was once one with her biologically. If the person that I should be as close to as anyone else in the whole world makes me feel like the way that I feel, or the way that I experience myself is wrong, or I'm misinterpreting it, then maybe I don't know what's happening. That's the inner dialogue, the confusion. Like maybe I don't know what's going on, when in fact I do. And this is compounded by ulterior motives for manipulation, not just, maybe a disposition that prevents her from connecting with me emotionally, but there's also a deliberate angle where she, at a minimum, I know that she abused me as a child. She physically abused me, and she denies that. She denies any memory of any such events happening. There's a few specific events that come to mind that aren't important to get into. She denies. She was very slow to acknowledge that the childhood I had wasn't normal. She was very slow to acknowledge like how much how my childhood was painful for me. She kind of compartmentalized it. She would compare, like if I talked to her today, she'd compare to her own experience and say that, well, that was normal. But many things are not normal about my family. There's dysfunction rampant. And maybe not even necessarily in a, like, there's not like physical altercations or like really, really prevalent, overt dysfunction, but there's lots of like weird dynamics. There's lots of weird stuff that we just think is normal, weird ways that we approach conflict, weird ways that we discipline and we show affection or their lack of. But there's lots of it's not overt, but it's just in all the ways that believing that you're a good person doesn't prevent other people from feeling hurt by how you behave. You know what I mean? Like saying you're a good person doesn't make you a good person. Believing you're a good person doesn't mean that, or believing that you have the best intentions doesn't mean that your actions don't negatively impact other people. Even if you strongly believe that what you're doing is coming from a good place. And that cognitive distortion that I see in my mother is also something that I've lived with. Meanwhile, I was acting out sexually and I was being like disrespecting boundaries and just being like really, really, I was really angry. I was really self-isolating and I'd sabotage relationships. But meanwhile, I was acting in a lot of ways that weren't beneficial to myself and were hurtful to others. I felt like I needed to maintain this feeling of perfection, or like like what was happening was okay. Who I was okay. I needed to justify to myself. I didn't want to believe that I was a bad person. So I learned to try and manipulate other people to reflect back to me what I wanted to feel about myself. So I established a lot of relationships that were founded on lies, that were founded on subtle untruths. I wore a mask socially in order to fit in. You know, I hid my autism, my stimming. I hid my the things that made me me. I hid my physiology, my humanity behind perfection and ego, trying to be something. This fragile house of cards I built around myself to shield myself from the mirror that is human existence. The mirror in terms of, you know, we are to this world both a reflection of the world and the world is a reflection of us. It's a reciprocal, a mirror facing itself. And I built a house of cards, a veil, you know, a house of cards to stand between these two mirrors, metaphorically. And this is, you know, maybe I'm leaning too heavy on the metaphor, self-awareness. But a lot of my life has been this desperate desire to maintain a facade, an idea of who I am. But this idea had very little to do with how I felt in terms of like authentic feeling. Like I would say that I was good or that I would say I was bad, but I was kind of like looking up into the clouds as if my body, my nervous system was there. But I wouldn't stop to think about how I felt. I wouldn't stop to feel. And that was a big part of it, kind of like this ego, this construct that I had developed, this false self, kind of allowed me to engage with the world kind of through a buffer. And it truly was an excellent protective mechanism. In my childhood, it made total sense. Who I was authentically was rejected and was made to feel wrong. My sensitivity and my vulnerability was treated like a flaw in my family. I was pestered and I was terrorized by my uncles. I was made to feel so terrible. And like reacting to my abuse, dealing with all that pain as a young child, I wasn't afraid to express it back then, and I was punished even more severely for expressing it. I had no boundaries. I was made to feel like I shouldn't defend myself, and that I couldn't express myself the way that I wanted to, or the way that nature intended me to. So I kind of receded into myself. I cocooned myself in a doctored identity that I would change to the person. It was like a liquid. You know what I mean? And so my identity became this illusory thing, or this elusive thing. Morely illusory. It was an illusion. Like I would lie about where my family was from. I had to lie about what was going on at home. Otherwise, I would have been stripped. I would have been taken from my home. Not that I would have the ability to articulate the kind of sexual violence that I was going through at the hands of my stepfather. I wouldn't have the words to talk about it as a young child, so I confabulated, I made up stories about the way that my family was like. I felt totally alone with the burden that I was living with. And I felt at ease with this ego, this kind of inner voice, or this sum of parts. Maybe the ego isn't this unitary thing, but it's a collective, or if you want to use internal family systems, IFS language, you could talk about kind of like a protector parts. This plethora of protector parts that were working 24/7, hyper vigilantly, trying to protect me from overwhelming experiences in my childhood, because these parts believe that they need to, and many of these parts are still active in my 22-year-old psyche. They're still prevalent. Excuse me, sorry, I bumped my keyboard. I'm gathering my thoughts. But so in terms of like depression and sadness, I had all these really deep feelings that I felt viscerally. I would cry, I would bawl. I was so overwhelmed and overtaken by these emotions that my parents didn't know how to accept. They didn't know how to console me. Because at many points, my parents were at least an exacerbating factor. They made it worse how I felt. So I mean, like, how could they really soothe the pain that they were contributing to, consciously or subconsciously? But nonetheless, I would reach for that connection. I would reach for that support, and I wouldn't find it. I was disappointed constantly in my childhood, constantly. And eventually, I kind of shut down, and I resigned myself to self-destruction. And that was a very gradual downward spiral, a slow descent into a hell of my own creation. Pornography, acting out, stealing underwear, objectifying women, and just being like really trying to become this character of a rapist, this characterization of the man that abused me, this emulation that wasn't conscious. It was entirely subconscious. It was like I was on autopilot. I was becoming this thing. I was becoming the thing I very hated in childhood. But there were points in my life where I felt dangerous. Like I felt like I could have hurt people. In high school, I was exhibiting a lot of behavior that was escalating. Meanwhile, I had all these cognitive distortions that would allow me to carry out various acts of voyeurism and perversion. Meanwhile, I would, wear a mask to the world that would reflect back my goodness and my perfection. So there was an inner sense of a disconnect between the person that I was behaviorally, the person that I was allowing myself to become, and who I wanted to believe I was. There was always that kind of inner disconnect. And I found that mushroom psilocybin experience is kind of bringing back to that, how I kind of got started onto this journey of healing. I feel like psilocybin forced me to acknowledge my shadow, the parts of myself that I didn't want to acknowledge, but were there nonetheless. And that was a staggering and shocking and disorienting and terrifying thing. Watching basically through psilocybin experiences, watching my ego, the way that I interact with the world, the way that I think about myself and other people, watching that framework dissolve, and then seeing what was underneath was all these behaviors and all this self-loathing and all this pain and all these ugly feelings that I was so desperate to escape from. And finding it all again, slowly. And it came in this, again, my experiences with psilocybin, it was very gradual. Over maybe the course of a year or two of frequent to occasional usage. Kind of the doors started opening. And then eventually, the biggest realizations came with the flashbacks that started returning, both on psychedelics, and they are undeniable. They're undeniable. My ego has no defense against it. It's like, it's happening, and there's nothing I can do to stop this. And I still feel afraid sometimes. Like, I'm 22 years old. My stepdad's in the room next to me. But some nights I do feel afraid, like the flashbacks, they start coming back. It's almost like it's trickling in, and I have these big feelings of just disgust, like, oh, I can't believe I lived through all that. Like, I'm cringing, like I just, like, my entire body's like, ugh, like it feels disgusting, and it's almost like the feelings are coming back, and so they do creep in, and sometimes the flashbacks are like really bad. Sometimes like I'm quite close to remembering something. And I get little fragments, like I just now I see my stepdad in my doorway, and he's kind of giving me these eyes, this look. And there was nowhere for me to go. There wasn't any. I couldn't defend myself. I tried to stick up for myself once. I remember one time. My fight response, my body was dumping adrenaline. And I'm more so inferring this after the fact, because the memory's kind of hazy. But I mean, like, I knew he was coming. So I remember I was getting ready in my room. I was kind of thinking, like, should I have a weapon? Like, should I get something? I didn't really have much, but I'm like maybe I should have something to attack him. And I remember he came into my room, and I rushed him. I ran right at him. And I think I probably, like, hit him. Like, I was, like, banging my fists against him. But I was just... all my fighting energy was like, we're going to fight this off. We're going to deal with this. And I remember he looked at me. He looked at me with his eyes like this look of utter shock. Like, he couldn't believe what I was doing. Like, I had done something so horrible. And he's like, like, I believe what he said is like, you're going to regret that. You're going to regret that. Like, he threatened me. And then he left. And then I was left with this deep sense of collapse, that it's like I put together all my strength to fight him off. And when he came back, it was worse. When he came back, I think it was somewhere in the middle of the night, but yeah, he came into my room, like suddenly, out of nowhere. He came into my room and he told me to roll over. And I remember trying so hard to just disappear, the feeling of leaving my body, like just trying to put a static in my brain so I didn't have to feel what was happening. And then other times he'd come into my room, and then I'd have to give him like oral sex, and I can still see him kind of like looking up at him. And I know I didn't like it. I could see his face, just like I can't believe. I do believe it. Like, that's my shock. I'm still in shock. That someone that I loved, someone that I trusted, is capable of doing something so horrific to me. That's my physiology, my 22-year-old physiology, still enmeshed with them because I still live with them. These are the limitations where I'm like I can't believe that happened. But it's like those memories are still loaded in my nervous system. They're there. But it's just my ego, its responses, I can't believe that happened. And it did. And I'm saying that as an admission to you as the audience, but also to me and my subconscious. I'm kind of reflecting back to my subconscious that I am in shock, and I do feel overwhelmed. But I acknowledge that I was horrifically sexually abused and assaulted in my childhood. And I've tried very, very hard to forget it. And so around that time, I confronted him about it. Eventually I've confronted him, and it might have been before this whole situation, after the first time I got sexually assaulted, and I realized that our relationship wasn't this special thing between me and him. But I told him. I remember my mom and my stepdad were in the kitchen, and I said, like I don't even know what words I would have said, but I confronted him in such a way that he responded like, I would never do that. I would never do that. But he lied to my face. He lied to my face, and my mother, she didn't believe me. I vaguely remember him threatening me the first time he sexually assaulted me in my parents' bedroom. I remember I was kind of like holed up in the corner, my body, like I was just curled. I was dead. I couldn't believe what just happened. He pinned me to the floor and he raped me. Like, that's what that was. I didn't have the words for that then. But he sexually assaulted me. I refused him sexual favors. I remember a lot leading up to that moment. I remember he called me into his room for something. I don't know if my mom was... She might have been at the store for something. I think in general I get the impression that he would abuse me more when I was alone in the house with him. It makes sense, right? But I know that my mom was around for some of the abuse, that she was aware of it, and that she allowed it to happen. I have an inkling that she was involved. Like, she actively sexually abused me. Because I know that I was afraid of her as well. I feel like some of the memories starting to solidify a little bit. Memories not like in specifics, but just like remembering how I felt during certain years. Because the worst of the violence happened probably between maybe age 10 and 12. I don't know how frequent the violence was, but I know that it was enough that it was like... I know that it got really bad at a certain point. I would get sick before bed. I'd get so nauseous. I get so nauseous. And at the time, I was dissociating so heavily from the violence that was happening. I'm like, oh, like I feel nauseous. I keep throwing up before bedtime. And I tell my mom about it, and she's like, well, maybe it's just a mind over matter thing. Meanwhile, her husband, my stepfather, was coming in my room and sexually assaulting me in the middle of the night. Mind over matter. That's the kind of mother I have. There's a lot of pain. There's a lot of hate. There's a lot of resentment. There's a lot of bitterness that I have for her. I loved her, and I loved my stepdad. And I do try to be a good son. But every ounce of love, everything that I had, was chewed up and spit out back in my fucking face. That's the pain that I live with. And so I'm learning to live with that and hold space for it. That I can both still like crave that kind of deep connection, but acknowledge the deep feelings of pain and resentment that are a very natural response to completely ridiculous, ludicrous, disgusting, completely actions so hateful. It was so hateful. What happened to me was so hateful. A child, desperate to be understood and to be loved. What I experienced was hate. And that was something that also started coming to me on psilocybin. The acknowledgement that what was happening to me was deeply hateful. And I thought it was my fault as a child. I blamed myself for what was happening. There must be something so wrong with me. There must be something so wrong with me that my stepfather was sexually abusing me. There must be something so wrong with me that my mother doesn't love me and I feel like my parents hate me. There must be something so wrong with me that even my own father doesn't believe and didn't protect me. There must be something so wrong with me. I blamed myself. Every second, I blamed myself. We talked about, I'm gonna wind this down because honestly I think like probably even I need a fucking break after talking about this stuff, but it's heavy. It's incredibly heavy. And so you know what, I'm not gonna rush this video to an end. I'll drag this out to 30 minutes just so you know I can kind of talk myself down, because yeah, we've discussed some heavy shit. I'm just taking some breaths. So I think this video is kind of like important in the sense of like for example, if I just talk about like how I was acting out sexually, if I just talk about the child on child sexual abuse that I perpetrated, if I just talk about me developing a habit of stealing underwear and watching pornography for hours daily, you know, if I talk about all these behaviors in isolation, you know, you might look at me and just be like, bro, like what the fuck is wrong with you? And you know what, like what I did was wrong. What I did was wrong. That's that. I have no desire to justify. The way that I was acting was destructive and hurtful to other people who had no blame in my situation and how I suffered. And that's that. Maybe more so I'm me feeling like I like right now, like I feel like I'm making a case for myself why I'm not such a terrible person. But the bottom line is, whether or not I want to assign labels, I'm a good person, I'm a bad person, I'm me. And I dealt with things my way. And we're all entitled to that. I've made a lot of mistakes in my life. I've made a lot of choices that have hurt a lot of really good people. And at a minimum, destroyed my relationships with them if it didn't directly harm them, like in in specific relationships in my life. But again, I'm talking to the person who has done things that they can't forgive themselves for, or they feel like they can't forgive themselves for. I'm talking to the guy who feels like there's no hope for them and that they don't deserve forgiveness. I'm talking to you, and I'm thinking about you. And you know, hey, like I'm not, I was raised Catholic, but I'm not like super into it. But you know, like I'm praying for you. You know, like I'm rooting for you. I'm rooting for you. Root for me. I'm rooting for you. And if you're ever curious, you know, what you know, kind of like what would go on in somebody's life that they would exhibit these behaviors in isolation in terms of like, you know, like why someone might develop a habit of stealing underwear, because, you know, that does happen. Why someone develops a porn addiction, for example, porn addiction as a label. Well, you can get a perspective on that here. Thank you for being here. I hope not to have always such heavy, difficult conversations, but thank you. Thank you. Take care, and I hope to see you again soon.